The terminal buzzed with life, a symphony of rolling suitcases, hurried footsteps, and the low hum of distant announcements. Travelers hurried along the concourses, clutching boarding passes, coffee cups, or children's hands, each focused on their own destination. Among them, a woman moved with quiet efficiency, gliding through the crowd as if she were a shadow. No one paid her much attention. She was the kind of passenger who blended into the background, unremarkable in every way. Yet beneath her calm exterior, there was an undercurrent of awareness, of subtle vigilance that had been honed over years of experiences most would never understand. Her name was Lieutenant Commander Evelyn Carter. At 34, she had already flown more combat missions than most pilots could count in a lifetime. But today, she was just a passenger. Her uniform of the day was casual, a soft gray sweater, jeans, and a scarf loosely draped around her neck. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her small carry-on rolled quietly beside her as she approached the gate. Her eyes, a sharp blue that seemed to miss nothing, scanned the departure board, noting the gate number, flight time, and the occasional change in the schedule. Everything looked normal. Everything should have been ordinary. Yet there was an invisible tension in her chest. Even in her civilian life, habits from her military years clung to her like a second skin. She checked her watch compulsively, noting the time in multiple zones. She observed the behavior of people around her, the nervous man fidgeting with his boarding pass, a young mother attempting to calm a restless toddler, the elderly couple slowly shuffling toward the gate. Each movement, each minor disruption, registered in her mind, catalogued, and filed without conscious effort. Evelyn knew that anticipation was a dangerous friend, sometimes a source of unnecessary anxiety, but often it saved lives. The boarding announcement crackled over the loudspeakers, a polite voice calling passengers in groups. Evelyn fell in line without hesitation, her eyes forward, her movements efficient. When the gate agent scanned her boarding pass, she offered a faint, professional smile. The machine beeped, and she was waved through. As she walked down the jet bridge, she observed the plane outside, noting its condition, the alignment of the wings, and the number of crew members visible through the cockpit windows. These were the same observational skills that had saved her life countless times in the air, though today they were merely a habit. Inside the plane, the cabin smelled faintly of coffee and recycled air. Passengers were settling into their assigned seats, some engaged in quiet conversations, others lost in their phones or books. Evelyn maneuvered her carry-on into the overhead bin above row 10 and slid into her seat. She tucked her scarf neatly, unzipped her bag slightly to access a paperback, and opened it, pretending to read. In reality, her attention was divided. She scanned the aisle and the rows in front and behind her, noting the faces and postures of her fellow travelers. She observed details most would overlook: the nervous tapping of a foot, the way someone's hand gripped their armrest too tightly, the subtle glances exchanged between strangers. Row 10, where she sat, was quiet. Across the aisle, a man adjusted his neck pillow, oblivious to the woman who seemed ordinary, but was far from it. In front, a teenager listened to music, earbuds in, bobbing to a beat only he could hear. Behind her, a mother attempted to soothe the child, whispering reassurances that went unheard. Everyone moved through their small dramas, with the assumption that today would be ordinary, that nothing out of the norm would occur. Evelyn allowed herself a moment of irony, a tiny smirk at the thought that, in her life, ordinary was never quite ordinary. The flight attendants moved down the aisle, welcoming passengers, securing bags, and offering bottles of water. Evelyn watched their movements closely, noting their efficiency and any deviations from routine. Flight attendants were trained to spot issues quickly, but she could see the cracks in their calm small gestures that betrayed tension, the subtle arch of a brow, a hand lingering near the emergency kit. She didn't judge them for it. Even the most experienced cabin crew would feel a ripple of unease if something abnormal occurred. Evelyn's mind wandered briefly, imagining scenarios. She envisioned a sudden turbulence, a passenger collapsing, or a mechanical issue. In each, she calculated responses, sequences of actions that would mitigate danger. This mental rehearsal was second nature, a skill honed through years of combat preparation. Her eyes, however, always returned to the present, scanning the cabin with unbroken attention. She wasn't looking for trouble, had a way of finding her, but she was ready. The hum of the engines began as passengers buckled their seatbelts. The safety demonstration played on the overhead screens, though Evelyn had memorized every step years ago. She watched the expressions of fellow passengers, some attentive, others distracted, a few visibly anxious. Anxiety was contagious in confined spaces, and she made a mental note of potential triggers for fear or panic. Every detail mattered: the position of the overhead bins, the location of emergency exits, even the seating arrangement of those around her. A man seated a few rows ahead began coughing, drawing worried looks from those nearby. Evelyn observed without reacting, noting the sound, duration, and intensity. Her training taught her to separate instinct from impulse, observation from action. Not everything required intervention, but everything required awareness. Her attention shifted subtly when a child behind her began crying loudly, the sound ricocheting through the cabin. Mothers and fathers murmured soothing words, but Evelyn's gaze remained calm and analytical, absorbing every movement, gesture, and expression. She allowed herself a moment to breathe. Today, she reminded herself, was supposed to be ordinary. A commercial flight, ordinary passengers, ordinary destinations. But the edge of her mind remained alert, a shadow of readiness. Even civilians carried unpredictability within them any moment. Any action could become a crisis, and she had learned long ago that the first moments were the most critical. As the plane taxied toward the runway, the engine's roar grew steadily. Evelyn adjusted in her seat, placing her hands neatly on her lap. Around her, passengers prepared for takeoff with varying levels of anxiety and excitement. A couple clasped hands tightly. A teenager whispered into his phone, and a flight attendant checked the cabin one last time. Everything appeared normal, calm, and routine, exactly as it should have been. Then, the captain's voice broke the monotony. "Ladies and gentlemen," it began, calm but carrying an unmistakable gravity, "please ensure your seatbelts are fastened. We're preparing for takeoff. And if there are any combat pilots on board, we ask that you identify yourselves to the cabin crew immediately." The words hung in the air like a lightning bolt. Passengers froze, eyebrows lifted in confusion, whispers erupted, and the cabin shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Evelyn felt a familiar tightening in her chest, not fear, but a surge of readiness. Instantly, her posture straightened, her senses sharpened. Every muscle, every thought, every memory of a lifetime spent in high-stakes situations aligned with the sudden seriousness of the moment. Passengers glanced around nervously. Some looked puzzled, uncertain whether it was a joke, a misunderstanding, or a genuine emergency. Flight attendants exchanged quick, silent glances, communicating urgency without words. The ordinary hum of the flight evaporated, replaced by a charged tension that seemed to settle over the cabin like a storm cloud. And in row 10, the woman who had appeared ordinary for so long now became something else entirely: an observer, a protector, a potential first responder in a situation that could become life-threatening in a heartbeat. Evelyn exhaled quietly, a practiced motion to center herself. Her eyes swept the cabin, taking in every detail: the nervous tapping of fingers, the subtle clenching of jaws, the silent apprehension of those who didn't understand why the question had been asked. She didn't panic. She didn't react publicly. but her mind raced through possibilities, contingencies, and plans. This was no ordinary flight anymore. The world she had left behind, the cockpit, the missions, the threats, was whispering back into her life with the urgency of a warning. The plane's engines rumbled louder as it prepared for takeoff. Passengers secured themselves, unaware that their ordinary flight had shifted into something extraordinary. Evelyn's gaze never wavered. She had trained for crisis she hoped she would never face again, and yet here it was, an unknown variable, a potential threat, and the quiet expectation that someone would act. She had been ready before she even realized what was coming. The ordinary flight was over. She shifted slightly, closing her book, letting the cover rest on her lap. Her fingers traced the edges of it briefly, a small comfort in a moment of uncertainty. The cabin seemed smaller now, the passengers' whispers louder, the air charged with anticipation. Every instinct in her body whispered that she needed to be prepared. She didn't need to be a hero yet, but she needed to be ready. And in that quiet moment, the ordinary passenger in row 10 became far more than anyone could have guessed. As the wheels lifted off the runway, the hum of the engines became a steady vibration beneath her. Evelyn adjusted in her seat, eyes forward, observing, calculating. The world outside the windows blurred, but inside the cabin, every detail was vivid. The ordinary flight had begun as it always did, but something had shifted, something invisible yet palpable. In row 10, the quiet woman was awake in a way passengers could not see, a presence both unassuming and formidable, silently preparing for whatever was about to unfold. The captain's voice still echoed in the cabin, calm but carrying an unmistakable weight that made every passenger sit up a little straighter. "Any combat pilots on board?" he repeated, slower this time, as if emphasizing the urgency. The question felt out of place, surreal even, in a plane filled with people heading home or on vacation. Passengers exchanged confused glances, some chuckling nervously, assuming it was a prank or a misstatement. But the atmosphere had already shifted. Ordinary chatter died down, replaced by an almost tangible tension that made the hum of the engines feel louder, more threatening. Evelyn Carter, seated in row 10, immediately felt her senses sharpen. Her body responded before her mind fully processed the words. A subtle straightening of her posture, a tightening of her grip on the armrest, and a quiet shift in focus marked the transformation from ordinary passenger to alert professional. Years of military training kicked in instinctively. She had heard similar announcements under far more dangerous circumstances. Though the passengers around her were mostly unaware, she could feel the sudden pulse of anxiety radiating through the cabin. The man in the seat across the aisle from her, oblivious moments before, turned toward the overhead compartment, as if the captain's words had triggered an internal alarm. A mother tried to calm her toddler, whose cries had started again, but the child's unease mirrored the rest of the cabin. The murmurs of confusion spread, soft but pervasive. Evelyn could hear snippets. Did he just say combat pilots? And is this some kind of joke? Her eyes flicked over each passenger, analyzing micro-expressions, tightened lips, raised eyebrows, hands fidgeting. Every detail mattered. Even what seemed trivial could indicate fear, intent, or danger. Flight attendants quickly shifted into their own version of preparedness. Their professional calm now carried an edge of urgency. One approached Evelyn with a polite but urgent question. "Ma'am, are you a combat pilot?" Evelyn's heart rate remained steady, but inside, she felt the familiar rush of adrenaline. She nodded once quietly. "Yes, I can help if needed," she said, her voice calm, neutral, giving nothing away to the untrained ear. The attendant's relief was almost imperceptible, a subtle nod that conveyed trust without alarming the other passengers. Around her, whispers grew louder. A young man in row 8 glanced at her, eyes wide, mouth slightly open, as though trying to reconcile the ordinary appearance of the woman beside him with the possibility she could be a trained combat pilot. Evelyn returned his gaze briefly, nothing more than a polite acknowledgement. But the message was clear. She was not to be underestimated. Some passengers started to fidget, moving nervously in their seats, glancing toward the aisle, the cockpit, and one another. Fear, curiosity, and confusion created a complex web of tension that filled the cabin. The captain's voice came again, this time more formal, a low note of seriousness, threading through the standard procedural tone. Ladies and gentlemen, we've received a report of a potential threat aboard. I must ask that any trained personnel, particularly combat pilots, identify themselves. This is not a drill. The words carried a weight that pulled at the collective nerves of everyone aboard. Ordinary passengers exchanged nervous glances, some clutching phones, others gripping armrests, while the crew subtly prepared for possible intervention. Evelyn felt the familiar flicker of recognition training taking over her consciousness. Situations like this, although rare, were what she had prepared for her entire adult life. Her mind began ticking through probabilities, potential causes for the announcement, plausible threats, immediate containment strategies, and safe zones within the cabin. She assessed who might be capable of aiding her, how flight attendants could assist, and how to subtly manage passengers' panic without escalating the situation. Her analysis was rapid, methodical, and silent, invisible to the average observer. Passengers began asking questions, voices rising in nervous chatter. "What's going on?" One woman whispered to her companion. "Is it a hijacking?" Another asked, her eyes darting toward the cockpit door. A man muttered under his breath, hands shaking slightly. "This has to be a joke?" "Right?" Evelyn allowed herself a quiet sigh, recognizing the normalcy of fear. Panic was contagious, and unchecked panic could be as dangerous as any direct threat. She needed to act, but she needed to remain invisible until the moment demanded visibility. The woman's gaze flicked to the man in row 12, whose restless movements suggested nervousness but also potential unpredictability. A backpack, slightly ajar, sat between his legs. She noted the alignment of the aisle, the placement of passengers, and even the weight distribution of the cabin. Her mind processed scenarios that might take others hours to imagine, running simulations in seconds. Every movement around her, no matter how small, carried potential significance. Evelyn had learned that danger often announced itself in minor details that ordinary passengers would overlook entirely. Flight attendants continued moving down the aisle, scanning passengers' faces, their professional composure masking concern. One approached the rear of the plane, signaling subtly to the cockpit. Evelyn followed these cues discreetly, noting shifts in body language and small, deliberate movements. A man in row 7 shifted uncomfortably, seeming to notice her observation. She smiled faintly, not to be friendly, but to acknowledge his presence, then returned her attention to the aisle, keeping her focus on multiple potential flashpoints. Her calm exterior belied the torrent of thoughts running beneath, mapping potential responses with precision. Minutes stretched like hours as the cabin remained suspended between ordinary flight and potential crisis. Passengers whispered, some reaching for phones to call or text loved ones. Evelyn knew such actions could inadvertently escalate tension, and she mentally cataloged who posed risk and who required reassurance. The ordinary passengers were unaware that a silent evaluation of threats, passengers, and possible escape routes was unfolding around them. Evelyn's eyes never left the cabin for long, and even when resting briefly on her book, she did so in a way that allowed her to continue scanning subtly. The plane's engines hummed steadily, preparing for takeoff. The vibration beneath her seat reminded Evelyn of long hours in fighter jets, the controlled chaos of cockpits, and the focus required to remain aware when every second mattered. The ordinary flight pattern, the routine procedures, and the seemingly mundane environment all became variables in her internal map of readiness. She adjusted slightly in her seat, ensuring her legs had room for quick movement, checking the placement of her bag, and subtly noting which passengers could act unpredictably under stress. Another announcement crackled over the intercom, this time from the first officer. We request all trained personnel to remain seated until contacted by a crew member. Your cooperation is appreciated. Evelyn understood the intention. Maintain calm, prevent panic, and control the flow of information. Passengers murmured, some glancing toward the aisle and the cockpit, others attempting to peer at her, curious about the woman who had been identified as a combat pilot. She remained quiet, letting the cabin chatter fill the space while her mind analyzed, plotted, and prepared. A soft cough behind her reminded Evelyn of the human element. Fear, confusion, and anticipation were spreading like ripples across the cabin. She noted the mother trying to console her child again, the young couple whispering anxiously, and the man gripping his armrest. None of them realized the depth of what might be about to happen, or the fact that someone trained for extraordinary crisis was already quietly taking stock of their safety. Her gaze lingered for a moment on the aisle, calculating potential paths of movement, areas of risk, and possible intervention points. Her thoughts drifted briefly to what she had left behind in her civilian life. Her apartment, quiet weekends, and the illusions of safety and routine. Those comforts now seemed fragile, almost naive. The world was unpredictable, and situations requiring courage, decisiveness, and skill could arise without warning. Today was proving that truth once again. Evelyn took a deep breath, centering herself as her body tensed with readiness. The ordinary flight was no longer ordinary, and the invisible boundary between calm and crisis had shifted dramatically. Passengers began noticing the subtle changes around them. Flight attendants moved more deliberately, adjusting stances and exchanging quick nods. Whispers became more frequent, questions more pointed. Evelyn's eyes caught the faint shift in a man several rows ahead, whose gaze darted nervously toward the cockpit. He was aware, but untrained. Fear sharpened his instincts, but limited his options. She catalogued him as a variable, someone to monitor, but not approach unnecessarily. Her analysis encompassed the entire cabin, every face, every posture, every minor movement carrying significance. Then, a new sound cut through the murmurs, the thud of a bag shifting in the overhead compartment, drawing the attention of a nearby passenger. Evelyn's eyes flicked to the source instantly, observing without revealing recognition. Minor disturbances often precede major events. She noted the man's reaction, the woman's glance toward him, and the way others subconsciously reacted to subtle cues. Every ripple of movement was data, every expression a clue, every gesture a potential trigger. Her mind ran through dozens of scenarios, each branching into outcomes, consequences, and contingencies. Evelyn exhaled quietly, almost imperceptibly. She had prepared for moments like this. Long before she ever dreamed she'd be a passenger on a civilian flight. Her calmness contrasted sharply with the nervous energy around her, and yet it was an invisible shield, protecting her focus and clarity. Passengers continued their chatter, oblivious to the depth of readiness seated among them. The ordinary flight, the mundane journey, had already been replaced by something far more complex, far more dangerous, and far more urgent than anyone could imagine. And in that moment, Row 10 was no longer just a seat on an airplane. It was the observation post of a trained professional, a vantage point from which lives could be protected, decisions made with precision, and a potential crisis managed before it spiraled beyond control. Evelyn Carter, unassuming and quiet, became the eye of a storm that had yet to fully reveal itself. And as the plane's engines continued their steady roar, every heartbeat, every glance, Every whisper carried significance. Evelyn Carter sat upright in row 10, her eyes calm, her posture perfect. Yet inside her mind, a storm of memories raged. The cabin around her was tense, filled with passengers whispering nervously, unaware that a silent calculation was unfolding among them. Every face, every gesture, every subtle movement had been catalogued by her trained eyes. But as the flight hummed steadily along its course, her thoughts drifted back to a time when ordinary flights weren't just inconvenient, but dangerous, where a wrong move could mean life or death. She remembered the first time she had entered a cockpit as a trainee. The hum of the engines, the faint scent of fuel and oil, and the overwhelming roar of instruments had been terrifying. Her instructor had looked at her and said, "A pilot's calm is the only shield between order and chaos." Evelyn had memorized every control, every gauge, every switch, not because it was required, but because it could save her life. That calm, that presence, had been drilled into her until instinct and reflex became inseparable from her identity. Combat missions had tested her far beyond the scope of civilian imagination. She remembered the night missions over hostile territory, the dim cockpit lights casting long shadows across the console, the tense silence punctuated by the occasional radio check. She had flown low through valleys to evade radar, banking sharply around treacherous mountain peaks, every second a balance of precision and risk. She recalled the rush of adrenaline as enemy fire streaked past, the split-second decisions that determined survival. Those missions had been unforgiving. Mistakes were fatal, hesitation was a liability, and courage alone was never enough. Evelyn's mind replayed one mission in particular. A convoy had been ambushed in a hostile desert region. She had been called in to provide aerial support. The coordinates had been vague, the terrain unforgiving, and the clock ticking mercilessly. She remembered the precise calculations, the adjustments made mid-flight to avoid ground fire, the sharp turns to provide cover, and the coordination with her squadron that required perfect timing. Every action had been rehearsed hundreds of times, yet every moment was unpredictable. By the end of the mission, lives had been saved, but the memory of tension remained imprinted in her mind, a reminder that preparation was not optional. Those experiences had taught Evelyn more than technical skills. They had taught her patience under pressure, the necessity of observation, and the importance of subtlety. She had learned that fear could be harnessed as a tool, not a weakness. She had learned to read micro-expressions, body language, and environmental cues, to anticipate problems before they became crises. In the controlled chaos of a military cockpit, where every move could be life-altering, she had become a master of awareness, a strategist in a confined, high-stakes environment. As her mind traveled through these memories, Evelyn observed her fellow passengers again. They were ordinary, blissfully unaware of the invisible threads of calculation weaving through their midst. She noted the young woman across the aisle, nervously adjusting her scarf, the elderly man gripping his armrest tightly, the restless child behind her, kicking lightly against the seat. Each movement could matter, each person a variable in a potential chain of events. Her instincts told her that the ordinary flight she had boarded had become something far more complex, something requiring more than calm nerves. It required skill. She remembered the intense physical training that had forged her reflexes. Long hours in simulators, endurance flights, and tactical drills had conditioned her body to respond instinctively to crisis. Her muscles remembered maneuvers she had performed hundreds of times, reactions so ingrained that even when she slept, her body retained the memory of motion and precision. She had survived situations that would have shattered most pilots, guided by intuition sharpened into a weapon. Those skills, buried deep in her subconscious, were ready to be called upon at a moment's notice. Evelyn also remembered the psychological training. Combat pilots were taught to remain calm under extreme pressure, to compartmentalize fear, and to focus solely on actionable information. Panic was a luxury that could be fatal. Every emergency, every potential threat had been distilled into a mental checklist. Assess, anticipate, act. Her mind was now running the checklist silently, scanning the cabin for anomalies, potential triggers, and opportunities to maintain order. The instincts that had kept her alive in deserts, mountains, and hostile skies were now fully awake, quietly guiding her focus. One memory, more personal, flashed through her mind, a mission that had gone catastrophically wrong. Equipment had failed mid-flight, communications had broken down, and her squadron had been scattered. Evelyn had been forced to make split-second decisions with no guidance, no reassurance, only training and instinct. She had maneuvered the aircraft, avoided hostile detection, and improvised a safe landing under impossible conditions. That moment had cemented her understanding of responsibility. When lives were in your hands, hesitation was the enemy. And now, though the threat was undefined, that lesson returned with clarity. Evelyn's eyes shifted to the flight attendants moving through the aisle. She watched their subtle signals, noting small deviations from standard procedure, a hand lingering near a kit, a glance toward a specific passenger, a quiet step that seemed more deliberate than necessary. Her mind categorized these observations: potential allies, potential risks, areas to monitor. She calculated what actions could be taken discreetly to manage passengers' anxiety while preparing for a possible threat. It was a delicate balance, requiring judgment, subtlety, and the ability to act without alarming others unnecessarily. The murmur of passengers continued to fill the cabin, punctuated by occasional coughs, whispers, and nervous shuffles. Evelyn's mind noted each sound and movement, assimilating them into her mental map. She remembered how crucial these small details had been during combat missions. A subtle shift in a person's posture could indicate aggression. A misplaced object could conceal danger. A whispered word could signal intent. Every element of the cabin had become data to be assessed, understood, and incorporated into her situational awareness. She recalled training exercises that simulated chaos, hijackings, engine failures, hostile intrusions. Each had required rapid assessment, controlled response, and decisive action. The scenarios had been designed to test not just technical skill, but emotional resilience and leadership. Evelyn had excelled, often being the first to identify threats and the first to act, maintaining calm while others faltered. These memories were not just recollections, they were active lessons in the present. The skills had lain dormant in civilian life, but now they were waking. Her mind briefly considered the ordinary passengers again. None of them knew what she had faced in the past. They would see only a quiet, calm woman, reading a book and sipping coffee. But beneath that facade, a highly trained operative was evaluating, calculating, and preparing. She understood the delicate nature of her role, to intervene only if necessary, to manage the situation without causing panic, and to ensure that the ordinary passengers remained safe, unaware of the depth of danger potentially surrounding them. Evelyn exhaled quietly, feeling the familiar rhythm of focus settling over her. She had trained for moments like this, for crises where the margin between calm and catastrophe was razor thin. Her mind ran through scenarios once more, faster, sharper, more precise than ever. She didn't yet know the specifics of the threat aboard this flight, but she knew that preparedness, calm, and decisive action would be required. That knowledge was enough to sharpen her instincts, steady her nerves, and prepare her for the moments to come. As the plane continued its smooth ascent, the cabin lights reflecting softly against the polished surfaces, Evelyn's memories receded into the background, leaving her fully present. Her past experiences, the triumphs, the dangers. The lessons had forged her into someone uniquely capable. She could feel the weight of responsibility settling comfortably on her shoulders. While passengers whispered and speculated, she silently prepared for what might arrive, grounded in training, experience, and the quiet confidence that comes from having survived the unimaginable. Row 10, ordinary to the untrained eye, had become a control center. Evelyn Carter, once a combat pilot, was now a sentinel in plain sight. She was calm, poised, and ready. Every fiber of her being resonated with the lessons of her past, informing every decision, every glance, and every quiet action. The ordinary flight had changed. The ordinary passengers had no idea of the vigilance seated among them. And as the engines hummed steadily, Evelyn waited, fully prepared to act the moment the situation demanded. The hum of the engines was steady, a reassuring backdrop against the murmurs and nervous glances of passengers. Yet the cabin now carried a weight of unease that made every whisper sharper, every cough more pronounced. Evelyn Carter remained seated in row 10, her posture unassuming, her hands resting calmly in her lap. But her mind was fully alert. Every sound, every movement, every subtle glance became data, cataloged and analyzed instantly. She knew instinctively that the ordinary rhythm of this flight had shifted. Something was wrong. Something hidden. The captain's voice returned over the intercom, calm yet imbued with a tension that made it impossible to ignore. Ladies and gentlemen, we've received reports of a potential threat on board. I ask any trained personnel, particularly combat pilots, to make themselves known to the cabin crew immediately. Please remain calm and seated for now. Passengers reacted in a mix of disbelief and fear. Some whispered to their neighbors, unsure whether it was a real emergency or a mistake. Others fidgeted nervously, adjusting straps, checking phones, or gripping armrests tightly. The ordinary rhythm of conversation, laughter, and casual activity had disappeared, replaced by a quiet, palpable tension. People were suddenly aware that the flight was no longer ordinary. Evelyn's gaze swept the cabin with trained precision. She noted subtle irregularities. A man in row 12 shifting restlessly in his seat, a backpack left slightly ajar under the seat in front of him, and a woman in row 9 whose eyes kept darting toward the overhead compartments. Her mind immediately ran through possibilities. Was the threat mechanical, human, or external? What were the most likely scenarios? What actions would neutralize danger while preserving calm among passengers? A flight attendant approached Evelyn cautiously. "Ma'am," she whispered, barely audible to anyone else, "are you trained? Can you help?" Evelyn nodded once, her expression calm and measured. "Yes, tell me what's happening," she said quietly. The attendant leaned in, scanning the aisle to make sure no one was listening. "We're not sure yet. There's a man acting strangely near the rear of the cabin. He hasn't done anything yet, but the captain asked for trained personnel." Evelyn exhaled slowly, centering herself. The situation was fluid, uncertain, but her training allowed her to cut through panic and fear with logic. She scanned the aisle again, noting passengers who were agitated, nervous, or restless. Some might inadvertently escalate the situation. Others might be unaware of the threat entirely. Her eyes settled on the man the attendant had indicated. He was seated near the rear, shifting constantly, his backpack between his legs. Every movement was small but calculated. Evelyn's instincts told her that vigilance was essential. Her mind ran through tactical assessments. If the man intended to act aggressively, she needed to contain the threat without alarming the rest of the cabin. If it was a false alarm, she needed to ensure the situation did not escalate. Either way, passengers' safety depended on her calm, precise intervention. Evelyn had faced far higher stakes in hostile skies, yet even here, confined in a commercial cabin, the principles remained: assess, anticipate, act. She subtly shifted in her seat, ensuring her path would be clear if she needed to move quickly. She noted the positions of flight attendants, the layout of the aisle, and the nearest exits. Her internal map of the cabin became a tactical blueprint. Every second counted, and she was already calculating outcomes for multiple potential scenarios. The ordinary hum of flight had vanished, replaced by anticipation and tension that radiated from every passenger. A whisper reached her ears from a passenger nearby. "Is this really happening?" a young woman asked, gripping her boyfriend's hand tightly. Evelyn turned her head slightly, offering nothing more than a calm nod, an unspoken reassurance that someone competent was aware and ready. The woman's gaze lingered for a moment, noticing Evelyn's composure, and then returned to the aisle. Evelyn knew that maintaining calm even silently was just as critical as physical intervention. Fear spread faster than fire in confined spaces. The man in the rear shifted again, noticeably more restless. Evelyn observed his posture, shoulders tensed, hands gripping the backpack straps, eyes flicking intermittently toward the aisle and the cockpit. These were the signs of someone aware of scrutiny, perhaps anticipating discovery, perhaps ready to act. She cataloged these details, comparing them against potential threat scenarios. Every action he took had meaning, every hesitation a clue. Timing would be everything if intervention became necessary. Another flight attendant approached, whispering quickly to Evelyn, "We're going to need you to move toward the rear. Keep an eye on him. Do not alarm the other passengers." Evelyn nodded again, smoothly and without drawing attention. She rose gracefully, placing her book in her bag, adjusting her scarf, and moving toward the aisle with the casual confidence of someone who belonged in any situation. Her movements were deliberate, controlled, but invisible to the untrained eye, perfect balance of presence and subtlety. As she advanced, she observed passengers reacting unconsciously to her confidence. Nervous hands relaxed slightly, worried eyes softened, and the general atmosphere of fear seemed to ebb, however faintly. Evelyn knew this was a psychological effect of authority. Her calm, measured demeanor projected control, even as her mind raced through tactical contingencies. Each step, each observation, each glance was part of a larger assessment, gathering information, anticipating escalation, and preparing for rapid action. The man in the rear shifted suddenly, as though sensing her presence. He glanced toward her with a fleeting, nervous glance, then returned to fiddling with the straps of his backpack. Evelyn's pulse remained steady. Years of military training had conditioned her heart to remain calm under pressure. She memorized his position, movements, and timing. This was an active assessment, determining threat level, potential actions, and optimal strategies. In her mind, multiple outcomes unfolded simultaneously, each branching into decisions that could save or endanger lives. She approached the man slowly, maintaining a distance that allowed observation without confrontation. Her eyes never left his hands, which shifted subtly within the backpack. Evelyn's breath remained steady, her body relaxed but ready to act in an instant. She assessed passengers around him, noting who might be in harm's way and planning subtle interventions to prevent panic. Every second was precious. Hesitation could be costly. She had learned in combat that anticipation often mattered more than reaction, and now she applied that same principle in the civilian cabin. The man fidgeted again, glancing toward the flight attendants. Evelyn noted his body language. Tension coiled in his shoulders, a faint tremor in his hands, rapid blinking. She cataloged these micro-expressions with the precision honed from years of high-stakes missions. A split-second decision might be required. She needed every piece of information to act decisively and prevent escalation. Her mind ran simulations, testing outcomes based on his potential movements, assessing the safest way to neutralize any possible threat while minimizing attention from the rest of the cabin. Passengers continued to whisper nervously. Some were oblivious, absorbed in their own panic, unaware of the threat or the woman moving calmly toward it. Others observed her subtly, sensing authority without fully understanding why. Evelyn's presence alone altered the dynamics of the cabin. Her calm confidence became a stabilizing influence, even as the potential danger loomed behind her. This was part of her training. Manage perception, influence behavior, and maintain control without alarming those unprepared for crisis. The flight attendant beside Evelyn leaned in, whispering again. "He's acting more restless." "We can't be sure what he's capable of." Evelyn nodded. She had noted the same. Her mind was already executing a plan, each step measured, each action precise. She evaluated the nearest obstacles, the position of other passengers, and the optimal approach to ensure control. The threat was growing, subtle but undeniable. Preparation and timing were paramount. Any misstep could escalate panic or trigger a dangerous reaction. The man shifted once more, standing slightly to adjust his backpack. Evelyn's trained eyes noted the movement instantly. The object inside could be dangerous, but its contents were unknown. She assessed his posture, his proximity to other passengers, and the potential consequences of action versus inaction. Her mind split into multiple timelines, anticipating reactions, predicting behavior, and preparing intervention strategies. She exhaled slowly, centering herself in preparation. The ordinary flight had vanished. The passengers around her were unaware of the precise calculations occurring among them, the silent anticipation and the controlled vigilance of someone trained to respond decisively. Evelyn's presence became the fulcrum between order and chaos. She advanced carefully, quietly, and purposefully. Every second, every movement, every glance was deliberate. The threat was emerging. The cabin was tense. And Row 10, once ordinary, was now the nerve center of observation, assessment, and preparation. Evelyn reached a position where she could observe the man clearly without revealing her intent. She assessed his hands, his posture, his gaze. She scanned the surrounding passengers, noting who might panic, who might interfere, and who might remain calm. The flight attendants flanked her subtly, ready to assist. Evelyn's mind continued running tactical scenarios, testing each potential response against the behavior she observed. The threat had emerged. It was real, yet still contained. What happened next would demand precision, control, and courage. She exhaled once more, feeling the familiar rhythm of focus settle over her. She was ready. Every instinct honed from years of combat, every simulation run in hours of preparation, every lesson learned in life or death missions had brought her to this moment. The ordinary flight had shifted irreversibly. The threat was no longer hypothetical. And Evelyn Carter, seated and now moving strategically through the aisle, was the first line of defense between danger and every unknowing passenger aboard. Evelyn Carter moved deliberately down the aisle, her presence calm but commanding in a way that passengers subconsciously noticed. She kept her movements smooth, natural, unthreatening, yet every step was calculated for efficiency and control. Years of combat missions had trained her to operate in high-stakes environments where hesitation could cost lives. Here, confined to a narrow cabin, every inch mattered, every gesture had purpose, and every observer, passenger, or crew was a variable to manage. A flight attendant intercepted her halfway down the aisle. "Ma'am," she whispered urgently, leaning close to avoid alerting others. "He's acting more erratically. We're not sure what he's capable of. You'll need to approach carefully, and make sure no one else notices panic." Evelyn nodded almost imperceptibly. "Understood," she replied. Her voice was calm, neutral, the kind of tone that reassured without drawing attention. She adjusted the strap of her bag, subtly freeing her hands from movement, and continued toward the rear. Passengers noticed her moving, though none fully understood why she commanded attention. Nervous passengers instinctively stopped fidgeting, leaning slightly back in their seats as though sensing a stabilizing force. Those who glanced at her saw a quiet, composed woman, unflustered by the captain's announcement or the growing tension around them. Her composure alone acted as a buffer, dampening the ripple of anxiety, giving others a momentary sense of security. This was intentional. Evelyn had learned in combat that perception could be as crucial as action. As she approached the man in the rear, she observed him carefully. He shifted again in his seat, his backpack now resting partially on the floor. His eyes flicked toward the aisle, catching hers briefly, then darted away. Evelyn noted the subtle tension in his fingers, the restless tapping of his feet, and the rapid blinking of his eyes. Her mind processed every detail, running through potential outcomes. What would happen if he stood suddenly, if he reached for the bag, or if he tried to provoke panic among passengers? She assessed nearby passengers, too. A young woman seated directly across from him clutched her purse tightly, her knuckles white. An elderly man in the row ahead shifted uneasily, muttering under his breath. Each of them was a factor in the potential chain of events. Evelyn catalogued who could be shielded, who might inadvertently escalate the situation, and who could remain calm. She positioned herself where she could observe the man directly while remaining close enough to act swiftly if necessary. Evelyn's eyes met the flight attendants once more. A subtle nod passed between them, silent communication, more of urgency, trust, and understanding. They were a team now, coordinating without alerting anyone else. Flight attendants subtly moved to positions that would allow them to intervene without escalating tension. Evelyn took mental note of their placement, memorizing escape routes, containment areas, and areas where passengers could be safely guided if the situation escalated. The cabin had become a dynamic environment, a living map of potential threats, human variables, and tactical possibilities. The man shifted again, a more noticeable movement this time. He rose slightly, adjusting his backpack, the straps squeaking faintly against the carpet. Evelyn's attention sharpened, her body tensing subtly while maintaining the appearance of calm. She analyzed his posture, predicting the speed and direction of any movement. Her hands were ready to intervene, but she would act only if necessary. The goal was containment first, prevention second, and the safety of passengers always the priority. Evelyn spoke softly, quietly enough that only the flight attendant could hear. "Keep calm, follow my lead. If he moves aggressively, I'll handle it. Don't panic the others." Her words were deliberate, precise, a set of instructions designed to prepare allies without alarming the general cabin. The attendant nodded, her lips pressing into a thin line of concentration. Together, they formed a discreet line of defense, ready to respond but invisible to anyone untrained. The man's backpack shifted again. Evelyn's eyes locked on it, analyzing weight distribution, potential concealment, and the angle of access. Each subtle motion became critical information. Her mind ran through multiple simulations. If he reached for it, what reaction would be safest? How could she neutralize any immediate threat without creating panic? Every possibility played out in seconds, her body and mind aligned for rapid, precise action. Passengers continued to whisper, unaware of the silent battle of observation and anticipation unfolding among them. Some glanced nervously at the man in the rear, sensing unease but not understanding its significance. Evelyn recognized the importance of minimizing panic. The calm of ordinary passengers was a fragile asset, one that could unravel at any misstep. Her movements, though deliberate, were designed to appear routine, ordinary, even, so that fear would not spread like wildfire. She reached the row directly behind him, stopping just out of arm's reach. Her body was poised, but relaxed, projecting control while remaining non-threatening. The man shifted again, now standing fully, still fiddling with the backpack. Evelyn's mind calculated reaction times, angles of approach, and potential interventions. She needed to guide him into compliance without alarming passengers or escalating his actions. Precision and timing were everything. "Sir," she said, her voice calm, steady, and neutral, carrying authority without aggression. "Please remain seated. I'd like to speak with you." Her eyes met his, conveying both awareness and control. The man froze, a brief hesitation that confirmed her instincts. He recognized authority, even if he didn't know her credentials. Evelyn maintained a calm posture, allowing her presence to dominate the space psychologically without threatening physically. The man hesitated for a moment, then muttered something under his breath. Evelyn remained patient, letting him act within predictable parameters. She analyzed every micro-expression, tightening of the jaw, shifting of weight, movement of fingers. Each was a clue, guiding her next steps. Flight attendants flanked the nearby aisles, strategically positioned to assist if necessary. Passengers shifted slightly, sensing tension but unsure of its source. Evelyn's strategy relied as much on influence as on physical readiness. She took a small step closer, maintaining eye contact while subtly shifting her body to create a psychological boundary. Her training had taught her that space could be controlled as effectively as force. The man glanced around, realizing he was being observed, but he did not act aggressively. Evelyn's presence, calm yet assertive, subtly constrained him. The cabin itself became a controlled environment, with Evelyn as the unspoken anchor of order. A slight cough from a passenger behind her reminded her that chaos could emerge unexpectedly. Evelyn adjusted, scanning the surrounding rows, anticipating potential triggers of panic. The goal was containment, ensuring that the man did not escalate and that the other passengers remained calm. She projected a sense of control and authority without alarming anyone, the result of years of experience where perception was as critical as action. The man shifted again, this time slightly more aggressively. Evelyn remained poised. Her body was ready to act instantly, but her voice remained calm. "I need you to stay seated, sir," she said, softer this time, yet unwavering. Flight attendants subtly moved closer, prepared to assist, but Evelyn remained the focal point, the silent signal that control had shifted. The ordinary flight had become a stage for calculated, precise intervention. She noted a small detail: the man's backpack was slightly open, a minor bulge indicating that it contained something potentially dangerous. Evelyn's mind ran multiple contingencies: how to neutralize the threat, the safest path to take, and how to protect passengers without alarming them. Each second counted, each decision mattered. She exhaled slowly, centering herself, allowing her instincts to guide her movements while maintaining the appearance of calm. Evelyn's eyes scanned the cabin once more, ensuring that passengers remained composed. The subtle reassurance in her posture, voice, and movements had a stabilizing effect. Some passengers began to relax unconsciously, their attention partially diverted by her calm presence. Others remained tense, but none realized that the most dangerous moment of the flight had already begun, quietly managed by a woman in row 10 who had stepped into action with grace, authority, and precision. The ordinary flight, a mundane routine of travel, had been replaced by controlled vigilance. Evelyn had stepped up fully, coordinating with the crew, observing the potential threat, and preparing to act. Every detail mattered, every motion had purpose, and every passenger was a variable in the equation of safety. The cabin had become a microcosm of chaos, managed through calm, control, and expertise. And as the engines hummed steadily beneath her, Evelyn Carter remained poised, her eyes locked on the man in the rear. She was ready. The threat had emerged. The ordinary flight was over. Row 10, once a quiet, unassuming seat, had become the command center for vigilance, assessment, and decisive action. Evelyn had stepped up. Evelyn Carter stood silently just behind the man in the rear of the cabin, her eyes locked on the subtle movements of his hands and the weight of the backpack he clutched tightly. Each micro-motion, each shift of his posture, told a story. He was tense, aware of scrutiny, but uncertain of the authority observing him. Evelyn's years of combat training told her that hesitation now could determine the outcome. There was no room for error, no margin for misjudgment. Every detail mattered, and every second counted. Her presence was calm but deliberate. She projected authority without aggression, a balance learned in countless high-stakes operations. A misstep could trigger panic in passengers, provoke the man, or worse. Evelyn's eyes flicked quickly across the cabin, noting the positions of flight attendants and passengers alike. She had a mental map: who was in harm's way, who could assist if necessary, and which rows were safest to use as a buffer. The man shifted again, his backpack slightly heavier with the subtle movement. Evelyn noticed a minor bulge, something concealed inside. She analyzed the motion carefully, calculating whether it was likely a weapon, hazardous material, or a harmless object. Her instincts, honed from years of combat experience, told her to assume the worst until proven otherwise. In high-stakes situations, caution was as vital as courage. "Sir," she said firmly, calm and controlled, "I need you to remain seated. Let's not make this harder than it needs to be." Her tone was neutral, authoritative, and non-threatening to the untrained ear. The man's eyes flicked toward hers, then darted away. He shifted the backpack slightly, and Evelyn took note of the movement, her mind calculating the safest way to act. She was ready to intervene physically if necessary, but first, she needed to assess compliance. Flight attendants flanked her subtly, moving closer without drawing attention. Evelyn whispered softly to one, "Keep a clear path for evacuation if needed." "Observe his hands." The attendant nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. Every member of the cabin crew now relied on her calm judgment. Her position had shifted. She was no longer merely a passenger. She was the de facto leader, the anchor of order in an unpredictable environment. The man's breathing quickened slightly, the faint tremor in his hands becoming more pronounced. Evelyn recognized the signs of escalating tension, possibly fear or desperation. She needed to maintain authority while preventing panic. Her stance was deliberate, projecting control without aggression. She took a slow, measured step closer, signaling observation and readiness. The man noticed, but did not immediately react. His awareness of her presence was now a key factor in the balance of control. "Let's do this calmly," she said softly, still maintaining a safe distance. "I don't want anyone to get hurt. Can you put the backpack down for me?" Her voice was steady, measured, conveying both command and reassurance. The subtle use of verbal authority, combined with her composed presence, was designed to minimize resistance while asserting control. Evelyn had learned in training that fear could be managed if the person perceived a calm, capable authority figure. The man hesitated, glancing nervously toward the cabin. Evelyn noted the slight quiver in his jaw, the restless tapping of his feet, and the shifting weight of his body. These micro-expressions confirmed her assessment. He was uncertain, potentially scared, and aware that any aggressive movement could escalate the situation. Evelyn calculated the next step, a combination of proximity, verbal command, and psychological influence to guide him toward compliance. She took another slow step forward, her eyes maintaining firm, but non-threatening contact. "That's good," she said, nodding slightly, acknowledging his hesitation as progress. "Just put it down. No one needs to get hurt." Her tone was calm but authoritative. The balance of control was delicate. One wrong word, one abrupt movement, and the situation could escalate instantly. Evelyn had faced similar psychological dynamics in combat zones, where a single gesture could prevent catastrophe or trigger it. The man shifted again, now standing fully upright. He moved the backpack slightly, and Evelyn reacted instantly, placing herself strategically between him and the nearest passengers. She maintained a calm demeanor while ensuring she was in a position to prevent sudden movement toward others. Flight attendants subtly positioned themselves behind her, creating a controlled corridor. Evelyn's tactical training allowed her to orchestrate the environment with minimal visibility to those unaware of the threat. "Sir, just let it go," she said, her voice firm yet composed. "It doesn't have to end badly. You put it down, and this will be over." Her words were precise, designed to reduce tension and encourage compliance. She noticed a micro-expression, a fleeting hesitation in his eyes that confirmed he was considering her request. Timing and patience were crucial. She had learned that pressure applied too quickly could provoke panic, but a steady, calm approach often yielded compliance. The man's hand lingered over the backpack strap. Evelyn's muscles tensed subtly, ready to act if needed, but her composure never wavered. Every second of delay was analyzed, his posture, his breathing, and the slight tremor in his fingers. She calculated angles, body positions, and potential outcomes with precision. Her presence alone was a psychological stabilizer. Passengers remained unaware that a trained operative was quietly orchestrating the containment of a potential threat. Finally, a man set the backpack on the floor. Evelyn exhaled slowly, maintaining calm while ensuring he remained seated. She moved slightly closer, her stance firm but non-threatening, and gestured subtly toward him to stay seated. Flight attendants flanked her strategically, ready to assist if needed. Evelyn had turned a potential escalation into compliance without a single aggressive move, relying on presence, authority, and psychological influence. Passengers began to relax unconsciously, sensing the reduced tension in the immediate environment without understanding why. Evelyn maintained focus, ensuring the man did not make sudden movements. Her mind cataloged every detail: the position of hands, the weight of the backpack, and the proximity of nearby passengers. The potential threat had been contained for the moment, but vigilance remained paramount. She spoke softly, issuing clear instructions. "Sir, I need you to stay seated and keep your hands visible. The crew and I are here to help. No one wants this to escalate." Her voice carried authority, reassurance, and control. The man complied, shifting slightly but remaining seated. Flight attendants observed closely, ensuring they could intervene quickly if necessary. Evelyn's calm presence had transformed a potentially dangerous situation into manageable containment. Man's breathing slowed slightly, a sign that tension was easing, but Evelyn remained alert. She moved subtly, adjusting her position to maintain dominance of space while minimizing the risk of triggering panic. Passengers began to glance around, noticing less tension, unaware that a crisis had just been averted. Evelyn's presence, strategy, and composure had stabilized the situation. She whispered to a flight attendant, "Keep monitoring him, but make sure passengers remain calm. Let's keep this contained until we land." The attendant nodded, and Evelyn returned her focus to the man. She understood that vigilance had to be maintained until the threat was fully neutralized. Her training had taught her that danger often lingered even after apparent compliance, and she remained prepared for sudden developments. For a moment, the cabin felt almost ordinary again. Passengers whispered among themselves, tension easing slightly. Evelyn kept a steady gaze on the man, ensuring he remained seated and compliant. The ordinary hum of the flight returned, though subtly altered. Behind her calm exterior, she continued to assess, anticipate, and prepare for any sudden movements. The situation was under control, but not fully resolved. The plane continued smoothly, engines humming steadily. Evelyn's presence had prevented panic and neutralized the immediate threat, but she remained aware. This was not a victory, merely a moment of stability. Every detail mattered. She had prevented escalation, protected passengers, and maintained authority, all while keeping the potential threat contained. Her training, instinct, and composure had transformed what could have been chaos into managed control. And as she stood there, Row 10 became more than a seat. It was a vantage point of vigilance, observation, and decisive action. Evelyn Carter had confronted a potential threat, neutralized immediate danger, and ensured the safety of every unknowing passenger aboard. The ordinary flight, the mundane journey that began hours ago, had been transformed into a stage of quiet heroism. She exhaled slowly, a faint smile of relief crossing her features. The man was contained, the passengers were calm, and the cabin crew operated under her guidance. Evelyn remained poised, alert, and ready for the remainder of the flight, understanding that vigilance, patience, and calm precision were the keys to managing any crisis. Row 10, once a seat among many, had become a command post. Evelyn Carter, ordinary in appearance yet extraordinary in action, had stepped fully into the role of protector, strategist, and decisive actor. The flight was far from over, but for now, the immediate threat had been neutralized. Her presence ensured the safety of everyone aboard, and she remained a silent guardian, poised for whatever the journey might still bring. The immediate threat had been contained, yet Evelyn Carter remained vigilant. She stayed close to the man in the rear, eyes tracking every subtle movement. Though the tension in the cabin had eased, she knew all too well that appearances could be deceiving. One careless gesture or sudden movement could undo the calm she had cultivated. Years of combat and crisis management had taught her that even moments of apparent safety required unwavering attention. Row 10 had become her station of control, the nerve center of the cabin, and she would not allow her guard to drop. Passengers were beginning to relax, whispering cautiously among themselves. A few glanced at Evelyn with curiosity, sensing the calm authority she exuded without understanding its origin. A young mother adjusted her child on her lap, seeming reassured by Evelyn's composed presence. Even the man in the rear now seemed to understand that resistance would not serve him. The tension in his shoulders lessened slightly, though he remained seated with his hands visible. Evelyn's subtle control over the environment had worked, yet she knew her vigilance could not falter until the flight concluded safely. The cabin crew quietly moved among the passengers, maintaining calm and ensuring that no panic spread. Flight attendants exchanged brief nods with Evelyn, acknowledging her leadership without disrupting the overall calm. The man remained compliant, a faint trace of uncertainty lingering in his posture. Evelyn noted every micro-expression, the slight twitch of his fingers, the occasional glance toward her, and the small movements of his eyes. Each detail mattered. Any sudden action could signal a shift in intent, and she was prepared to respond instantly. The plane had begun its descent, the engines humming steadily as the aircraft aligned with the runway. Passengers tightened seatbelts, adjusted headrests, and braced themselves for landing, unaware that the ordinary hum of an airline journey had been replaced by a controlled orchestration of vigilance and intervention. Evelyn's mind remained active, calculating the safest protocols for disembarkation and managing both the man and nearby passengers. She understood that the final moments of the flight were as crucial as any in-flight maneuver. As the aircraft descended, Evelyn noticed subtle cues from the man. His breathing was slow but uneven, his gaze fixed intermittently on the backpack, then on her. She had learned from experience that compliance in these moments was fragile. A shift in perception, a sudden noise, or a misinterpreted gesture could trigger escalation. She adjusted her stance slightly, creating a psychological barrier that discouraged sudden movement while allowing him the illusion of control. Every detail was deliberate, every action calculated to maintain calm. The captain's voice returned over the intercom, calm and steady. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are beginning our final descent. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. Flight attendants, please prepare the cabin for landing." Evelyn exhaled slowly, allowing the crew to carry out standard procedures while she maintained focus on the man. Coordination and preparation were critical. The landing would require not just technical skill, but careful management of every human factor in the cabin. Evelyn whispered briefly to a flight attendant nearby. Keep a hand near his backpack. Guide him subtly if he resists exiting the plane. Make sure other passengers remain calm. The attendant nodded, understanding the weight of her instructions. Evelyn's experience in high-pressure environments had taught her the importance of clear communication, subtle influence, and leadership without alarm. Every crew member now operated under her guidance, though passengers remained blissfully unaware of the orchestration behind the calm. As the runway approached, Evelyn prepared for the controlled resolution. The man in the rear shifted slightly, an action that could have escalated the situation, but did not. Evelyn moved closer, maintaining a calm demeanor while positioning herself to influence his actions. Her presence, authoritative yet non-threatening, created a controlled environment where compliance was the most logical option for him. Subtle psychological management had been as vital as her readiness for physical intervention. The plane touched down smoothly, the wheels rolling firmly along the tarmac. The cabin filled with the typical sounds of landing engine deceleration, airflow adjustments, and murmurs of passengers preparing to disembark. Evelyn remained focused, ensuring that the man remained seated and that no sudden actions occurred. Flight attendants positioned themselves strategically, ready to assist in guiding him safely from the aircraft. The controlled environment she had created remained intact. Once the plane had taxied to a complete stop, Evelyn took decisive action. "Sir," she said calmly, yet firmly, "please remain seated. Follow the crew's instructions, and you will disembark safely. No one here wants any trouble." Her tone projected authority without aggression, maintaining control while allowing the man to feel guided rather than coerced. He complied, slightly tense but fully cooperative. The cabin crew subtly coordinated the disembarkation. Passengers were guided row by row, some glancing curiously at Evelyn, but unaware of the crisis she had managed. The man, still compliant, was escorted carefully by flight attendants, as Evelyn maintained close observation, ready to intervene if necessary. Her strategic positioning and composed demeanor ensured a smooth process, preventing any panic or confusion. Once all passengers had disembarked safely, Evelyn allowed herself a moment of relief. The immediate threat had been neutralized without injury, panic, or chaos. Yet her mind remained alert, cataloging details and preparing for post-flight procedures. She had ensured the safety of everyone aboard through calm authority, precise observation, and strategic intervention. The ordinary flight had been transformed into a controlled operation, guided by her skill and experience. Crew members exchanged quiet words of gratitude and acknowledgement with her. One flight attendant, voice low but sincere, whispered, "Thank you. You kept everyone calm and safe. We couldn't have done it without you." Evelyn nodded, her expression neutral, yet reflecting quiet pride. She had acted not for recognition, but out of responsibility and training. The relief in the cabin was subtle but palpable, a testament to her ability to manage the situation effectively. Passengers gradually realized that something unusual had occurred, though details were scarce. Whispers circulated, curiosity mixed with awe and relief. Some speculated about the announcement, the calm woman in row 10, and the unusual tension they had felt. Evelyn observed without comment, allowing the cabin to process the event on its own timeline. She understood that fear and gratitude often took time to settle, and that her primary role ensuring safety was now complete. Authorities were waiting at the gate, prepared to assess the situation further. Evelyn remained poised, guiding the man to comply fully with instructions. She maintained calm authority, ensuring that his cooperation continued until the flight crew and security personnel assumed responsibility. Every step, Every word and every gesture reinforced the stability she had cultivated throughout the flight. Her presence had been the decisive factor in preventing escalation now as the aircraft emptied. Evelyn reflected quietly on the experience. The flight had begun as an ordinary journey, filled with casual chatter, mundane routines, and the predictable rhythm of travel. Within hours, it had transformed into a stage for vigilance, strategy, and decisive action. She had drawn on her past experiences, training, and instincts to manage a potential threat, protect passengers, and maintain calm. Her role had been invisible to most, yet it had been pivotal. Row 10, once an unremarkable seat in a crowded cabin, had become the command center of calm, observation, and decisive intervention. Evelyn had transformed ordinary space into a strategic position, managing both human behavior and potential danger with precision. The ordinary flight had ended, but the experience left a lasting impression, not just on her, but on those who had glimpsed, even subconsciously, the quiet authority she projected. As authorities took over and passengers disembarked, Evelyn allowed herself a deep exhale. Her mission was complete. No one had been harmed, the potential threat had been contained, and the flight crew had maintained order. Yet she knew the value of calm. Preparation and vigilance would remain with her long after the plane emptied. This ordinary flight had revealed extraordinary circumstances, and she had risen to the occasion with quiet skill and unwavering focus. Passengers whispered among themselves as they exited, speculation and curiosity blending with relief. Evelyn remained composed, allowing the ordinary flow of life to resume around her. She had acted decisively, invisibly, and effectively. Her calm had been contagious, her authority unspoken yet unmistakable. Row 10 had been the fulcrum of order, and Evelyn Carter had ensured that chaos never had the chance to take hold. And as the last passenger left the aircraft, Evelyn quietly collected her belongings, reflecting on the lessons of vigilance, preparedness, and calm action. The ordinary journey had ended, yet the experience reinforced the extraordinary responsibility one carries when prepared to act, unnoticed but decisive. She stepped off the plane, ready to resume life outside the cabin, carrying with her the quiet satisfaction of a mission accomplished and lives protected. The airport terminal buzzed with the ordinary chaos of arrivals and departures. But for Evelyn Carter, the world had shifted subtly. The flight she had boarded hours earlier had begun as routine, a mundane journey across the country, yet it had become a silent battlefield. The ordinary passengers who disembarked now carried fragments of an extraordinary moment, mostly unaware of the danger they had narrowly avoided. Evelyn's quiet vigilance had ensured safety, yet her actions had gone largely unseen. As passengers streamed through the gate, murmurs of relief and curiosity swirled. Some glanced at her, a few recognizing her calm demeanor amidst the uncertainty, but most had no idea of the role she had played. The man who had caused tension on the flight was now under the custody of security personnel. Authorities moved quickly, questioning him with controlled precision. Evelyn observed from a distance, noting the efficiency and care of those trained to handle crisis after crisis. Her job on the flight was complete, but she understood that vigilance extended beyond the cabin walls. Flight attendants approached her, expressions a mixture of gratitude, admiration, and exhaustion. One reached out, grasping her hand briefly. "Thank you. You were calm, decisive, and helped us manage a very tense situation. Passengers remained safe because of you." Evelyn offered a small nod, the faintest smile crossing her face. She was accustomed to accolades being unnecessary. Her focus had always been on action, not recognition. Yet, in the quiet pride of a mission, successfully executed, she allowed herself a moment of reflection. The passengers' reactions varied. Some were shocked at the announcement they had heard mid-flight, replaying it in their minds with a mixture of fear and fascination. Others, who had sensed Evelyn's presence without understanding its significance, now speculated quietly about the calm woman in row 10, who seemed to command authority. Stories and whispers began circulating a woman whose poise had prevented panic, whose quiet vigilance had contained a threat. Evelyn listened to fragments of these narratives with quiet detachment, knowing the truth was more intricate and personal than anyone would ever realize. Authorities led the man away, a backpack carefully examined. The object inside was not immediately dangerous, though it had caused enough concern to warrant full attention. The relief was palpable among passengers and crew alike. Even as the situation resolved without catastrophe, the underlying tension had left a mark. People would carry the memory of those tense moments with them, a reminder of how ordinary routines could suddenly become extraordinary tests of calm and courage. Evelyn observed silently, noting how each individual processed the event in their own way. Evelyn walked slowly toward the terminal exit, her movements unhurried but purposeful. She carried no sense of triumph, only the calm awareness of responsibility fulfilled. Her reflection turned inward, revisiting the lessons embedded in her years of training and experience. The skills that had once kept her alive in hostile skies had now protected innocent passengers. Observation, anticipation, and controlled action had been more valuable than raw strength or confrontation. She realized that heroism often went unnoticed, existing in subtlety rather than spectacle. The passengers were slowly dispersing, some stopping to offer thanks, others quietly recounting their own impressions. Evelyn maintained her composure, acknowledging them with gentle nods or faint smiles. She understood that ordinary people rarely recognized the quiet calculations and instinctive vigilance that prevent disaster. Yet she found satisfaction in knowing that her actions had preserved safety and prevented panic. The quiet resolution of chaos often left no visible reward, but it carried an enduring impact. As she walked through the terminal, Evelyn reflected on the extraordinary nature of ordinary life. A flight that had begun with mundane chatter, casual routines, and predictable schedules had transformed into a crucible of decision-making and vigilance. Her ability to navigate that transformation had relied on preparation, discipline, and presence of mind. She recognized that the ordinary world, though filled with routine, often concealed moments that tested courage and character in unexpected ways. The crew gathered briefly to debrief, sharing observations, recounting procedures, and ensuring every passenger had been accounted for. Evelyn listened quietly, providing concise input when requested, but otherwise allowing them to lead the conversation. She appreciated the professionalism of those who responded to the unexpected situation with composure and skill. Coordination between trained professionals and a single vigilant passenger had been critical to the peaceful resolution, reinforcing the importance of teamwork and clear communication under pressure. Authorities approached Evelyn next, a combination of curiosity and professionalism in their demeanor. "Ma'am," one officer began, "your observations and actions were crucial. Can you provide a full account of what occurred during the flight?" Evelyn nodded, recounting the sequence of events with clarity and precision. Her account was methodical, detailing observation, assessment, and intervention without embellishment. She emphasized the subtle influence of calm authority, the importance of strategic positioning, and the careful coordination with the crew. Her words were met with professional acknowledgement and appreciation. The authorities understood the significance of her contribution, not just in preventing a potential threat, but in maintaining the calm necessary to manage human behavior during high-stress events. Evelyn's insight demonstrated how skill, experience, and judgment often operate behind the scenes, unseen but critically effective. Her actions had prevented panic, preserved safety, and ensured order during a moment that could have become chaos. Evelyn reflected quietly as she left the secured area of the airport. She had faced another scenario where vigilance and skill had mattered more than force, where calm observation had prevented escalation, and where a decisive presence had maintained control. The ordinary flight, the mundane journey that had begun hours earlier, had become a testament to the subtle power of preparation and awareness. Heroism, she realized, often existed in the quiet mastery of events rather than public recognition. Passengers continued to depart, sharing stories and speculation. Some offered thanks, still unaware of the full context of what had occurred. Crew members gave Evelyn brief smiles, acknowledging her contribution without ceremony. The man who had caused concern was now in the hands of authorities, his presence no longer a threat. The immediate danger had passed, yet the lessons of vigilance, calm, and decisive action remained vivid in Evelyn's mind. Evelyn paused briefly outside the terminal, the afternoon sun warming her face. The air smelled faintly of jet fuel, coffee, and the quiet bustle of travelers. She reflected on the nature of ordinary life, how quickly it could shift from routine to critical, how subtle observation and readiness could prevent disaster, and how ordinary actions taken at the right moment could have extraordinary consequences. Her training, experience, and composure had been the difference between calm and chaos on that flight. She walked toward the waiting taxi, carrying only her bag and a quiet sense of satisfaction. The ordinary world resumed around her families reunited. Travelers moved purposefully, and life continued with its familiar rhythm. Yet within that rhythm, Evelyn knew that vigilance, preparation, and calm action could prevent catastrophe. Row 10 would remain unremarkable to the world, but to her, it had been the center of order, decision, and silent heroism. Evelyn's reflection deepened as she considered the subtle heroism in everyday life. Ordinary moments, ordinary people, and ordinary routines often conceal opportunities for courage and decisive action. Her actions had been invisible to most, yet they had prevented chaos, preserved safety, and demonstrated the quiet power of skill and composure. Heroism, she realized, need not be grand or public. It could exist in the unseen mastery of events, in the ability to act decisively when stakes are highest. As the taxi pulled away, Evelyn watched the airport fade behind her. She allowed herself a deep exhale, the tension of the past hours slowly receding. Her focus remained clear, her mind cataloging the lessons and experiences from the flight. The ordinary journey had become extraordinary, yet it had ended without panic, without injury, and without chaos. She had stepped into action,